When Elvis Presley walked onto the MGM soundstage on July 15, 1963, to begin filming Viva Las Vegas, he thought it would be just another forgettable Hollywood movie in a long line of forgettable Hollywood movies. He'd made 17 films since getting out of the Army, and they were all the same. Shallow plots, mediocre songs, pretty co-stars he'd flirt with for 3 months and forget. But then he saw her. Ann-Margret Olsson, 22 years old, red hair, emerald eyes, and an energy that matched his own in a way no woman ever had. The chemistry between them was instant, electric, dangerous, and what happened over the next 4 months would become the most passionate, torturous, and forbidden love affair of Elvis's life. But there was one problem. Back in Germany, waiting for him, believing in him, was a young woman named Priscilla, and Elvis was about to betray her in the most devastating way possible. Las Vegas, Nevada, July 1963. Elvis Presley was 28 years old and trapped. Trapped by Colonel Parker's iron control over his career. Trapped by Hollywood's formulaic movie system that churned out 3 films a year, each worse than the last. Trapped by a relationship with Priscilla that he'd started when she was just 14 years old. A relationship that had gone on for 4 years now, with her living at Graceland under his parents' supervision while she finished high school, waiting for him to finally commit. Elvis loved Priscilla, or at least he told himself he did. She was beautiful, devoted, moldable. The perfect girlfriend who didn't question him, didn't challenge him, didn't make demands. She wore her hair the way he liked it. She dressed the way he wanted. She waited patiently while he traveled for movies and concerts. But if Elvis was being honest with himself, which he rarely was, Priscilla bored him. She was safe, predictable. And Elvis, despite all his fame and success, was slowly dying from that stability. The movies were killing his soul. The whole Hollywood machine was turning him into a caricature of himself. And then he met Ann-Margret. She walked onto the Viva Las Vegas set that first day of filming, and Elvis couldn't take his eyes off her. She was wearing a simple rehearsal outfit, fitted pants, a sleeveless top, but the way she moved made everything stop. She had this feline quality, this dangerous sexuality mixed with genuine warmth. And when she smiled at him, not starstruck, not shy, just a real, confident smile, something inside Elvis woke up. "You must be Elvis," she said, extending her hand. Her voice had a slight Swedish accent underneath the American English. "I'm Ann-Margret. I hear we're supposed to have chemistry." Elvis took her hand, and the moment their skin touched, he felt it. That electric charge, that recognition, like meeting someone you've known in another lifetime. "Guess we'll find out," Elvis said, trying to play it cool. But his heart was racing in a way it hadn't raced in years. The director, George Sidney, called them over to rehearse their first scene together, a flirtation in a casino. It was supposed to be light, playful, professional. But the moment Elvis and Ann-Margret started performing, everyone on set felt it. The energy between them wasn't acting. It was real. They filmed the scene 5 times because the director kept saying it was too intense, too real. But everyone could see that Elvis and Ann-Margret weren't playing characters falling in love. They were falling in love for real, right there on camera. After that first day of shooting, Elvis went back to his rented house in Beverly Hills and called Priscilla at Graceland. "Elvis, how was the first day?" Elvis stared at the wall, guilt creeping in. "Fine, just the usual." "Who's your co-star again?" "Ann-Margret. Swedish girl, professional. I miss you. When are you coming home?" "Couple weeks, maybe." "I love you, Elvis." He closed his eyes. "Love you too," but when he hung up, all he could think about was Ann-Margret's smile. He was in trouble. The next 3 weeks of filming were torture and ecstasy in equal measure. Elvis and Ann-Margret had scenes together almost every day. Dancing scenes, Romantic scenes. Chase scenes where they rode motorcycles through the desert. And every single moment they spent together, the connection grew stronger. They started arriving to set early just to spend time together. They'd sit in Elvis's trailer, talking for hours about music, their childhoods, their dreams, their frustrations with Hollywood. Ann-Margret understood Elvis in a way Priscilla never could. She was in the same business, facing the same pressures. "They want to turn me into a sex symbol," Ann-Margret said one morning. "But I want to be a real actress. Don't you miss making music that actually means something?" Elvis looked at her and something in his chest cracked open. "Every single day. Now I'm singing about carnival rides. It's killing me." Ann-Margret took his hand. "So why don't you stop? Tell Colonel Parker you're done." "It's not that simple. Parker controls everything. So many people depend on me. You're Elvis Presley. You changed the world once. You could do it again." Nobody talked to Elvis like that. Nobody challenged him. Ann-Margret saw the person he used to be and believed he could be that person again. And that's when Elvis realized he was falling in love with her. But wait, I need to tell you something crucial, something that makes this story even more complicated. Elvis and Ann-Margret didn't just connect emotionally. The physical attraction between them was overwhelming. And unlike with Priscilla, where Elvis had maintained a strange, controlling celibacy, keeping her pure while he slept with dozens of other women on the side, with Ann-Margret, there was no holding back. They became lovers by the third week of filming. It happened late one night after a long day of shooting. The whole cast and crew had gone to a party at the Sahara Hotel. Elvis and Ann-Margret slipped away together, riding Elvis's motorcycle out into the Nevada desert. They parked on a cliff overlooking the lights of Las Vegas, and for the first time in his life, Elvis felt completely present with another person. No games, no performance, just two people who understood each other completely. "I've never felt like this before," Elvis whispered. "With anyone." "I know," Ann-Margret said. "I feel it too. It scares me." "Why?" "Because you have Priscilla. I don't want to be the person who destroys that." Elvis pulled back, looking at her face in the moonlight. "What if I don't love her the way I thought I did?" Ann-Margret's eyes glistened. "Then you need to figure that out. Because I can't be your secret. I'm worth more than that." She was. Elvis knew she was. Ann-Margret wasn't some starlet using him for publicity. She didn't need Elvis Presley. She wanted him. And that made all the difference. They drove back at 3 in the morning. They kissed goodbye for a long time, neither wanting to let go. When Elvis got back to his place, he sat in his car in the driveway for an hour, head in hands, trying to figure out what to do. Call Priscilla and end it? Tell her he'd met someone else? Or keep quiet? Keep both women? Continue the lie? The next morning, Elvis called Priscilla and lied. More filming, reshoots, don't wait up. He hated himself for lying, but he wasn't ready to give up Ann-Margret yet. The affair continued. Elvis and Ann-Margret were inseparable. Everyone knew what was happening, but nobody said anything. Colonel Parker was furious. This could damage Elvis's image. But the chemistry was making the movie electric. It was going to be a hit, so he kept quiet and hoped it would burn out. But it didn't burn out. It got stronger. By October, when filming wrapped, Elvis and Ann-Margret were talking about marriage, children, a future together. "Leave Priscilla," Ann-Margret said one night in Elvis's Beverly Hills house. "If you don't love her the way you love me, you're not doing her any favors. You're wasting both of your lives." Elvis stared at the ceiling. Everything she said made sense. He didn't love Priscilla the way he loved Ann-Margret. Priscilla was safe. But Ann-Margret was real. Alive. "I'll do it," Elvis said finally. "When I go back to Memphis, I'll tell her." "You mean it?" "Yeah, I want to be with you. Really be with you." They made plans. After Elvis ended things with Priscilla, he'd return to Los Angeles. They'd get married. For the first time in years, Elvis felt like he had something real to look forward to. But then, everything fell apart. The night before Elvis was supposed to fly back to Memphis to break up with Priscilla, Colonel Parker showed up at his house unannounced. Parker rarely came to Elvis's home. He preferred to keep their relationship strictly professional. So when Elvis saw him standing in the doorway, he knew something was wrong. "We need to talk," Parker said, walking past Elvis into the living room. "And you're not going to like what I have to say." Elvis closed the door. "What is it, Colonel?" Parker pulled out a folder from his briefcase and threw it on the coffee table. Inside were photographs. Elvis and Ann-Margret on his motorcycle. Elvis and Ann-Margret kissing outside her hotel. Elvis and Ann-Margret at restaurants, at parties, at the beach. "The press knows," Parker said. "They've been following you for weeks, and they're about to run stories about your affair with Ann-Margret. Every magazine, every newspaper, every gossip column. They're going to destroy you." Elvis felt his stomach drop. "What are you talking about? How is this destroying me?" "Because America thinks you're a good boy, Elvis. They think you're a devoted boyfriend to that nice girl waiting for you at home. They think you're wholesome, safe, family-friendly. If they find out you've been cheating on Priscilla with a Hollywood actress, your image is finished. Your fans, especially the mothers and grandmothers who buy your records, will turn on you. The movie deals will dry up. Everything we've built will collapse." "That's insane," Elvis said, his voice rising. "People cheat all the time. This is Hollywood. Nobody cares." "They care about you," Parker snapped. "Because you're Elvis Presley. You're held to a different standard. And right now, you have a choice. You can stay with Ann-Margret and watch your career implode. Or you can end it, go back to Priscilla, and we'll manage the press. We'll say the photos were taken out of context. Just co-stars being friendly. Nothing more." Elvis sat down heavily on the couch, head in his hands. "I love her, Colonel. I love Ann-Margret. I was going to leave Priscilla for her." "Then you're a fool," Parker said coldly. "Love doesn't pay the bills, son. Love doesn't sell records. Love doesn't keep your career alive. You want to throw everything away for some actress? Go ahead, but don't come crying to me when it's all gone." Parker left, and Elvis sat alone in the dark for hours. The house was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Each tick felt like a countdown. Each second brought him closer to a decision that would define the rest of his life. He thought about Ann-Margret, about the way she laughed when they rode motorcycles through the desert, about the conversations in his trailer where she challenged him to be better, to be braver, to be himself. About the nights they spent together where he didn't have to be Elvis Presley the icon, he could just be Elvis, the man. With her, he felt alive in a way he hadn't felt since before the army, before Hollywood, before everything became about maintaining an image. But then he thought about everything else, everything he'd built. Vernon and Gladys back at Graceland. His parents, who'd gone from poverty to wealth because of his success. The Memphis Mafia. His friends who now had jobs and families, all supported by Elvis's payroll. The fans who bought his records, who believed in the image of Elvis as the good Southern boy. What would they think if he abandoned Priscilla for a Hollywood actress? And what about Priscilla herself? She'd given up everything for him. She'd left Germany, moved into Graceland at 17 to wait for him. If he left her now, publicly, it would destroy her. And despite everything, despite knowing he didn't love her the way he should, Elvis didn't want to be that villain. Colonel Parker's words echoed in his mind. Love doesn't pay the bills, son. And Elvis hated that he was even considering those words. When had he become this person? When had he started making decisions based on what Parker told him rather than what his heart wanted? But the truth was, Elvis had been making those decisions for years, ever since he'd signed that contract giving Parker 50% of everything, ever since he'd agreed to make these terrible movies instead of focusing on music, ever since he'd let Parker turn him into a brand rather than an artist. And each time he'd compromised, each time he'd chosen safety over authenticity, it had become easier to do it again. The photographs on the coffee table stared up at him. Evidence of his affair, evidence of his betrayal, evidence that he was capable of real passion, real love, real risk, but only when he thought no one was watching. And now someone was watching. The press, America, the world, and they were about to judge him for it. Elvis picked up one of the photos. It showed him and Ann-Margret on his motorcycle, her arms wrapped around him, both of them laughing with genuine joy. He remembered that moment perfectly. They'd just finished filming a particularly exhausting scene, and Elvis had suggested they escape for a few hours. They'd ridden out to Red Rock Canyon, watched the sunset, talked about their dreams. Ann-Margret had told him about growing up in Sweden, about coming to America with nothing, about fighting for every opportunity in Hollywood. She was a fighter, a survivor. She didn't need him. She wanted him, and that made all the difference. But wanting wasn't enough, was it? Not in Elvis's world. In Elvis's world, there were rules, expectations, an image to maintain, a machine to feed. And love, real, messy, complicated love, didn't fit into the machine. It threatened to break it. At 2 in the morning, Elvis made his decision. Or rather, he let Colonel Parker make it for him. He picked up the phone and dialed Ann-Margret's hotel. "I can't do it," he said, his voice breaking. "I can't leave Priscilla. Parker says the press is going to destroy us. He says my career will be over." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "So that's it?" Ann-Margret's voice was quiet, controlled. "Your career is more important than us?" "It's not just my career. It's everyone who depends on me. My parents, my friends, everyone at Graceland. I can't just—" "You can, Elvis. You just won't, because you're too afraid. You're too afraid to choose love over control. Too afraid to be vulnerable. Too afraid to lose the safety of your perfect image." "That's not fair." "It's completely fair. I was willing to risk everything for you. My career, my reputation, everything. But you're not willing to do the same for me. And you know what? That tells me everything I need to know. Ann-Margret, please." "Goodbye, Elvis." She hung up. And Elvis sat there, phone in his hand, knowing he'd just made the worst mistake of his life. The next day, Elvis flew back to Memphis. He didn't break up with Priscilla. Instead, he proposed to her, not because he loved her, but because it was safe, because Colonel Parker told him it would secure his image, because running back to Priscilla meant he didn't have to face what he'd just lost. Priscilla said yes immediately, crying tears of joy, believing that Elvis had finally chosen her. She didn't know about Ann-Margret. She didn't know about the affair. She didn't know that Elvis was only proposing because he was too scared to choose real love over manufactured perfection. Elvis and Ann-Margret never spoke again after that phone call. They saw each other occasionally at Hollywood events over the years, but they kept their distance. The love was still there. You could see it in their eyes when they looked at each other, but it was buried under layers of regret and what-ifs. Viva Las Vegas came out in 1964 and became Elvis's highest-grossing film. The chemistry between him and Ann-Margret was undeniable. Audiences could feel the real passion burning through the screen. Critics called it Elvis's best performance in years. And every time Elvis watched the movie, he saw the moment when he was truly happy. The moment when he was with someone who made him feel alive. The moment he chose to walk away from Twad. Elvis married Priscilla in 1967. The wedding was in Las Vegas, a quick, private ceremony that felt more like a business transaction than a celebration of love. Colonel Parker had arranged everything, controlled every detail, made sure the press got exactly the photos they wanted. Elvis, the devoted boyfriend, finally making good on his promise. America's heartthrob settling down with his perfect girl. But the marriage was troubled from the start. Elvis still controlled everything about Priscilla. How she dressed, how she looked, who she could talk to, where she could go. He'd molded her into his ideal woman. But the problem with creating someone to fit your fantasy is that eventually, the real person underneath starts to suffocate. And Elvis had never actually wanted the real Priscilla. He'd wanted the idea of her, the safety, the control, the image. Priscilla, for her part, was starting to wake up. She was in her early 20s now, no longer the 14-year-old girl who'd been swept away by Elvis's attention. She was starting to ask questions, starting to want things for herself, starting to realize that she'd spent her entire adult life trying to be someone else's creation, rather than discovering who she actually was. Elvis resented her questions. He'd given her everything: wealth, fame, status, the Presley name. What more did she want? But what Priscilla wanted was something Elvis couldn't give her: freedom. The freedom to be herself, the freedom to make her own choices, the freedom to be loved for who she was, not for who someone else had shaped her to be. And late at night, when Elvis couldn't sleep, he'd think about Ann-Margret. He'd wonder what his life would be like if he'd made the other choice, if he'd been brave enough to choose love over image, passion over security, freedom over control. Would he be happier? Would he be more fulfilled? Would he still be making music that mattered, instead of churning out forgettable soundtrack albums for forgettable movies? He'd see Ann-Margret occasionally at industry events. Their eyes would meet across crowded rooms, and for a moment it would all come rushing back. The connection, the chemistry, the what could have been. But they never spoke, never approached each other. The distance between them was measured not in feet, but in the weight of choices made and opportunities lost. In 1968, Elvis did the Comeback Special, that legendary performance that reminded the world why he'd become the king of rock and roll in the first place. For one night, he was dangerous again, raw, real, authentic. And after the show, feeling that old fire burning inside him, he almost called Ann-Margret, almost picked up the phone to tell her, "You were right. I should have chosen you. I should have chosen myself." But he didn't make the call, because by then it was too late. Ann-Margret had moved on with her life. She was thriving in her career, making choices on her own terms, living authentically in a way Elvis never could. And Elvis was still trapped in the same cage he'd built for himself years ago, trapped by image, by expectation, by the machine that Colonel Parker controlled. The 1970s brought decline. Elvis's health deteriorated. His addiction to prescription drugs worsened. His performances became erratic. He gained weight, lost weight, looked puffy and tired. The Vegas residencies that had once been triumphant became sad spectacles. A once great artist going through the motions, trapped in a cycle of performing the same songs night after night while his body and spirit slowly died. Priscilla left him in 1972. She'd met another man, a karate instructor who treated her like a person rather than a possession. When she told Elvis she wanted a divorce, he was devastated. Not because he loved her, but because she was leaving him. Nobody left Elvis Presley. He was supposed to be the one with the power, the control. But Priscilla had found something he could never give her: herself. In 1973, Elvis and Priscilla divorced. Priscilla had finally found the courage to leave, realizing that she'd spent her entire adult life trying to be someone else's fantasy rather than herself. When Elvis heard the news, he called Ann-Margret for the first time in 10 years. "I should have chosen you," he said. "Yes," Ann-Margret replied. "You should have. Is it too late?" There was a long pause. "I'm married now, Elvis. Happily married. I have the life I always wanted. And you chose your path a long time ago. Do you ever think about what we could have had? Every day for the first 5 years. Then less and less. And now I just think about the lesson you taught me. That you can't build a life with someone who's too afraid to choose you." Elvis died in 1977. Ann-Margret was one of the few people from his Hollywood days who attended his funeral. She stood in the back, wearing dark glasses, crying silently. She'd loved him once, really loved him, and he'd loved her. But love wasn't enough when you were too afraid to fight for it. Years later, Ann-Margret was asked in an interview if she'd had any regrets in her career. She thought about the question carefully before answering. "Only one," she said. "And it's not a career regret. It's a personal one. There was someone I loved very much, and I thought he loved me too. But he was too trapped by his own image, his own fear, to choose what was real over what was safe. And I learned something from that. I learned that you can't save someone who's determined to save themselves from living." That was the closest she ever came to talking publicly about Elvis. But everyone who knew the story understood what she meant. Elvis Presley had a chance at real love, real happiness, real freedom. And he walked away from it because Colonel Parker told him to. Because his image mattered more than his heart. Because he was too afraid to lose control. The saddest part? It didn't even work. Elvis's marriage to Priscilla fell apart. His movies got worse. His health deteriorated. The perfection he'd sacrificed everything to maintain crumbled anyway. And in the end, he died alone, surrounded by prescription bottles and regrets. Ann-Margret lived a full, happy life. She married a good man who loved her for who she really was. She had a successful career on her own terms. She made choices based on what she wanted, not what someone else told her she should be. And sometimes, late at night, she'd think about Elvis, about what they could have been, about the life they could have built. And she'd feel sad, not for herself, but for him, because she'd escaped the trap, and he never did. Tell us in the comments, have you ever had to choose between love and career? Do you think Elvis made the right choice? Can you ever truly recover from walking away from real love? Let us know what city you're watching from today. Subscribe to our channel for more emotional and untold stories of Elvis Presley, the human side of legends, and the relationships that shaped and scarred them. Hit the bell to never miss a story that matters.